So I play on a men's slow pitch team, and we have 2 games tonight. So I'm either not going to be able to make a video on this until really, really late tonight when it is confirmed, or I can make a video on it right now because all of the Seattle picks have already been submitted to the NHL, and they're slowly being leaked out, and Frank Seravalli seems to have all of them. There are going to be a lot of people upset with the Toronto Maple Leafs' decision to go 4 forwards and 4 defensemen in this draft and protect a guy like a Justin Holl over both Jared McCann and Alex Kerfoot. And it's already been kind of worded like this, but Frank Seravalli used it again in the sense that they never really had Jared McCann. I mean, they did, but obviously their plan was to protect a guy like Justin Holl, and we'll go over that in a minute as to why maybe they were thinking that way. I mean, I kind of said it in my previous video when discussing this, but at the same time, they give up Philip Hallander and a 7th, and their roster for what it was last season and for what it is right now remains untouched by Seattle. But I said it in my previous video, the optics of that are absolutely garbage, especially when you're trying to get people excited for next season. I think to truly judge Dubas's decision, we need to see the rest of the plan. We need to see the rest of the offseason. And maybe that's me giving them the benefit of the doubt once again, when maybe they don't deserve to be given the benefit of the doubt at this point. But I would like to judge the overall plan more so than I do individual moves. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not going to be harsh or that I'm not going to critique individual moves. That just means that I want to see the overall plan. When you're looking at this list of defensemen, and you can cross Jamie Alexiak and Adam Larsson from the looks of it off of it, of UFA defensemen that are available, I can kind of sort of understand why the Leafs would want to protect a guy like a Justin Holl. So when you're considering the ice time that Justin Holl gives you both at 5-on-5 and on the penalty kill, and you're considering that he does that for $2 million a season, and you're also remembering that every team that loses a defenseman to the Seattle Kraken are going to be active in this market. I don't think that the Toronto Maple Leafs would have been able to replace Justin Holl. I'm not even saying upgrade on him, just replace him for anything less than $3.5 or $4 million. Especially when you sort out the defensemen on this list that shoot right-handed. Yes, there's a guy like Dougie Hamilton, but that's an entirely other discussion to have. Brandon Montour is more of an offensive defenseman. Cody Ceci, no thanks. Adam Larsson, signing with Seattle. Travis Hamonic, a large injury history, hasn't necessarily played the best the last couple of seasons, wants to be on the West Coast. Sammy Vatanen, the same sort of thing. Injuries, hasn't really played the best the last couple of years. David Savard probably prices himself out, and then the guys that you're looking at beyond this are not capable of playing in your top 4. So with not very many options available to them on defense, they looked to lose a forward, and they did, in Philip Hallander and a 7th. I'm not saying that I agree with it, I'm just saying that's the way that they probably looked at it. It's still, the optics of it are still garbage either way, but again, yes, I'm okay with losing Hallander and a 7th, even though Hallander was a decent prospect. So where do we go from here? Chris Johnson, on a radio hit this morning, said that the team isn't necessarily too happy with Pierre Engvall and Ilya Mikheyev. But I've said this, you don't necessarily need to trade one of them or both of them. I think that you could sneak a guy like Pierre Engvall through on waivers. And if you can't, well, then he's gone, right? You've accomplished the same thing, because I don't necessarily think that he has very much trade value. And the one thing that I will say, if the Toronto Maple Leafs were in the market to trade a guy like Alex Kerfoot, his trade value only goes up after the Seattle expansion draft, after every team has lost a player similar to him. And I don't think there are very many players that can give you the value that Kerfoot can, especially with his skating ability, a little bit of a playmaker when he's playing with the right line mates, his penalty killing abilities, and just his ability to sometimes be a feisty jerk. And I say that sometimes because we haven't really seen it over large stretches for just $750,000 in real money after his signing bonus is paid out. And you guys have heard me drone on and on and on about how much Kerfoot was miscast as the Leafs' defensive shutdown center last season. I went on about that before the deadline, after the deadline, going into the playoffs, and then he got a chance to play out of that role in the playoffs and had 5 points in 7 games. His first season here, the first 21 or so games were with Mike Babcock, and then he broke his jaw, had a concussion, got suspended, looked really good in the bubble against Columbus. Honestly, it's really hard to make an excuse for a player and say the last 2 years we haven't really seen what we have in this player, but I don't think we've seen what we have in this player. And that's up to management, and that is up to the coaching staff to make sure that they do not flub this asset any more than they've already had the last 2 seasons. Keep him, trade him. You can make the argument for both of them. Just don't you dare use him as the shutdown centerman next year. Hey, remember that thing in the video that I was saying earlier that, hey, maybe after the expansion draft, a guy like Kerfoot has more value because every team around the league just lost a player similar to him? Well, what if Travis Dermott also fits that description? You know, there's going to be 9 or 10 teams that lose a defenseman here. And if some of those teams strike out on the free agency market, maybe they circle back to what's available via trade, and $1.5 million is too much to be Toronto's 7th defenseman, and Timothy Liljegren needs an opportunity to play next year. You want depth, but you also want it to make sense in terms of the cost. Maybe the Leafs look to bring back a guy like Ben Hutton, who maybe costs you a league min, who they were interested in at the deadline a couple of years ago, had a really good season with the Kings, not just 2 years ago. They acquired him at the deadline. I think that was more of a longer-term look. He's bigger, he fights, he throws some hits, he kills penalties. I think that would be a decent 7th defenseman. Or you can keep Dermott, but I'm liking the $9.5 million a little bit more than the $8.8 million that we had to work with before. Usually I would throw in some placeholders and I would say, hey, you can spend $5 million on a top 6 forward. Hey, you can spend $3 million on a backup goalie. And hey, there's even $1.5 million left after that to go out there and get a centerman. Or you can spend a little bit less and you can balance out the lineup a little bit more. But I'm not going to do that because I really don't know what their plan is. But I would assume that they do have one rather than not having one. At least I hope. What I will say is that if they do decide to move on from Kerfoot now, that's $13 million in cap space. What I will say is if their plans are to go out there and trade for a younger forward, maybe like Connor Garland or Tyler Bertuzzi, there is a point where that doesn't make sense because I'm not interested in giving up the assets that it would cost to get either of those players and then giving them a large overpriced contract. I'm not interested in tying myself to a situation like the Montreal Canadiens did with Josh Anderson. They gave up the assets and then they gave him an astronomical $5.5 million contract for 7 years or something like that. At that point, you'd probably be better off going with one of the UFA forward options in Mikael Granlund or Brandon Saad or Thomas Tatar. But then it kind of goes the other way, where if you're looking at a guy like Gabriel Landeskog for $8 or $8.5 million, maybe it is better to spend the assets and get that younger, cheaper player. All I can say is that they've been really adamant about rolling this core back. Hopefully they make the necessary adjustments and tinkering around the roster to come back next season so that we can have some faith in them. Right? So if there are trades to be made and players to be signed, they better damn well do it. And I guess we're in a wait-and-see stage right now, and I guess we'll see what their plan is or what they're kind of thinking, what their options are, and what they had in front of them after July the 28th when free agency opens up. So I guess that's it for this video, guys. Make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more because more is always on the way. And I guess, like I've said at the end of all these videos, I'm going to be here and we're going to talk about things as they happen, I guess.